including a demonstration of the Grunfeld, which I was interested in. We have basically, I wanted to spend a little bit of time going through Grunfeld theory, and then a little bit of time going through a game that I just played against Piano Man in the Grunfeld. But yeah, we have a full set of games today, so I just wanted to quickly get on that. This was a game sent to me from Shantanu on Reddit. He's playing Black here. Hey, good morning, Aphelion. Thank you very much for joining the stream. Thank you for being here. So here we have basically Shantanu's playing Black here. And it's an Italian game, and I think this, yeah, so this transposes into Traxler theory, which is pretty crazy. Always fun to look at though. So here, bishop takes f2, and we've established that, yeah, Traxler. So always, always some good games out of the Traxler. But this is a cool one. So bishop takes f2, and then we've sort of established, right, that king to f1 is the objectively better move here. So we can look at this. So king does play f1 here, and then here. Um, the response for black is queen e7, knight takes h8, and then either d5 or bishop to b6. Both interesting. On bishop to b6, the queen to c7 is coming, but d5, e takes d5, bishop to g4. And I guess I sort of see it, Kira. I think that's flattering, if anything. Thank you for that. Um, but yeah, so bishop to g4 here, queen to d2, castles, knight to f7, queen takes f7, and here basically, we've sort of reached a position where black's up and has simplified the position a little. Sometimes that knight takes pawn, or that knight takes rook, basically doesn't pay off because basically because the rook is not really related to any strategic concepts. So white wins the rook, but black ends up having good chances to checkmate the king or get some uh, you know winning amount of material out of white later in this game. So let's just play through it again because I think this move order is so cool. Hey, good morning, El Gecko. Thanks all for being here. Thank you for being here. So yeah, so knight f6, bishop c4, knight f6, knight to g5, and then basically here, the response, the standard response is d5, but the Traxler is bishop to c5 with threats on f7 coming. Knight takes, bishop takes, and then either king takes f2, which we sort of evaluated as being, tricky, potentially drawish, but very aggressive for black in a difficult situation where white has to play very carefully. Or king f1, where there's still many threats, but basically there's a more difficult time trying to win here. Knight takes h8, d5, e takes d5, knight d4, and here yeah, so that is true. Bishop takes f7 is definitely better than knight takes f7. Here bishop takes f7, king e7, and the king's positioning is a little bit precarious here. King e7, by the way, is the accepted move, not king to f8. So here king to e7, bishop to d5, rook to f8, and black's basically getting some aggressive threats on the f2 pawn here. But with castles, it's a little bit it's basically this castles puts a lot of pressure on f2. Yeah, no. I know we've done some good. You've done some good analysis, and we've gone over the Traxler a few times. But it's such a popular opening, and it's exciting to play. So I figured I'd try to do a little bit more of a run of it here. I'm still learning it, to be honest. I didn't even really know that this opening existed prior to our first our first examinations on the stream. So I'm definitely still learning, and with us learning, uh yeah, I'm still probably making some errors here, but at least we know kind of the basic principles. Bishop takes f7 is yes, but bishop takes f7 is stronger knight takes f7 in general. The real move that I think makes it, gives more chances to white is king f1 as opposed to king takes f2 on the bishop sack on f2. Um, yeah, no, it's pretty wild. I mean, it's a really aggressive way to play. White plays this opening, which is aggressive. Knight g5 in the opening is pretty much aggressive by definition. Um, but uh, but Black comes back with a response that's even more aggressive. So overall, it's really kind of an exciting game. It's cool to look at. But anyways, Shantanu played a game out of it, so I wanted to make sure that we got to play the game through and take a little bit more time on this. Yeah. So I think here White basically ends up with some pretty solid. Basically he ends up with an excellent mate, but is running into some troubles in the middle. So let's see sort of how this can go wrong for White potentially. Um, Yeah, it also requires a lot of memorization. Memorization, which I haven't really gotten an opportunity to do until now. So with this, you know, basically getting all these games is super helpful for my learning. Actually, I had heard of the opening probably, but did not really, I'm not even sure I knew kind of the basic move order. But I've gotten to be more and more of an expert in it, which is cool. But still have a long way to go. I think Aphilion's the real expert here, to be honest. I'm sure his analysis which is excellent, by the way. If anyone's interested in looking at the at Aphilion's track slur analysis, it's in I think my personal Discord. But it's great analysis. I have gone over it, but have not memorized it. And if anyone has an opportunity or an interest, it's good analysis. He's really gone through a lot of these lines. But here, bishop takes f2, king f1, queen to c7, knight takes d5, pawn takes, knight d4, and c3. Okay, so white's basically showing a pretty good advantage here. This is very dangerous for both sides, I'd say. But at the end of the day, white is showing a slightly better position. A big piece in this opening is the strength of black's queen, and with the bishop on f2, the knight on d4, and the queen's end goal generally being to end up on f2. It's kind of tricky to it basically the one of the most compensating things for black is having a very active queen, and here his routes in are sort of blocked. So anyways, I would consider that to be I would consider that to be basically a the defining feature of white's eval advantage. The eval is also really complicated in this opening. It shifts around a lot. But still, I think with a +4 eval, even if the real situation is +2, that's still an advantage for white. Anyways, bishop takes f2, king f1, which I believe is correct, queen e7, knight h8, and then there's the fork. Yeah, so black has a few options here. Bishop to b6 or d5. D5, e takes d5, knight d4, h3, bishop g3. Okay, c3. This is interesting. With knight f5 here, black has attacking chances. I don't think it's enough for black to just win the rook on a1. I think even with the rook on e1 or the rook on a1 or sorry h1, white is up material, right? Just counting the pieces, white would be equal in material if the rook on h1 gets taken uncompensated. But this is actually a draw, which is crazy. D3, bishop d7, bishop g5, queen c5, which I was saying is the main threat and sort of a key part of this position. Queen to c5 is queen to c5 is the queen's basic route of attack on f2. Um, this is dangerous. Crazy opening. The engine bounces around like crazy because the analyses are so deep. But queen b6, a4, rook f8. And at the end of the day, Black's gonna end up being able to get in on this F file, I think. And with that one extra piece, then I think Black actually has enough compensation for all that he sacrificed here. Either knight to f4, or I'm thinking maybe bishop to f4 with knight to g3 threats, um, knight to knight to e3 threats after bishop to f4 as well are pretty dangerous. But this is just, I mean, it's just sort of crazy and complicated. Um, you know, I guess I would say it's kind of a beautiful opening in the sense that if the basically if both sides play into deep strategy here, it's really interesting and complicated. It practically, I think maybe one's best option is to just sidestep here. I mean, I would say like knight to g5 and then probably d5. This is the fork point where I think basically Black can turn this from a pretty wild position into a much more recognizable, less theory intensive one. Um, but that's no fun, right? So, this opening, I guess I would say, is probably slightly better for Black, or at least equalized. Um, but it's not the Traxler, right? So practically, I think this provides a pretty good solution. If the Black's playing two knights, which I think is a very reasonable response on knight g5, the I think the best response is d5 and not bishop to c5. Uh, but that's a much less fun game to play. King f1, knight takes h8, d5, pawn takes d5, knight to c4, or knight to d4. And yeah, it's basically some advantage for white, but really only a very it's like a single move basically. D6 is forced here. White is in a situation where he's basically playing single moves, and Black is steering it towards a situation where on any misstep, there's an advantage. So yeah, so like bishop to e2, bishop to h4, d6 or c3 or d6, knight takes, and already Black showing a winning eval. Queen takes, bishop g4. This is a win for Black. It really should be. Queen to b5, knight to d7. Queen f6 looks pretty dangerous. So yeah. Anyways, this is pretty crazy. It's another game out of the Traxler. I just want to do the full run over of Wampy's full game. Knight takes d5, knight d4, c3, bishop g4, and here I think basically I don't know. I guess maybe Black has overextended a bit. Um, so Queen e7 is playable. Knight takes h8 is playable. d5, pawn takes d5, knight to d5. And here, what's sort of crazy about this is that the engine doesn't even find c3. Yeah, so c3 is actually a mistake. It's interesting. Uh, Yeah, look how the computer shifts here. This is really wild. Yeah, so on c3, okay, so c3 plays plus 4-8. Then with the response bishop to g4, there's a 7-point swing that the engine doesn't even see. Uh, yeah, so this opening basically breaks the engine, which is cool. It's kind of impressive that you can still come up with openings that do that. But yeah, from this point, I think pretty objectively, black is or white is winning. Knight to e4, king to e1, queen h4, knight g3. Yeah, from here, maybe queen f6. Queen f6 looks pretty tempting. I don't know what black does in response to queen, or white does in response to queen f6. C takes b7 check. Uh, king e7. This is why it's just crazy. Um, Knight takes g3 here. Knight takes g3 is interesting. I guess I would say c takes b7. I think anything sort of runs into this c takes b7 threat. Um, I think, yeah. So okay, so black checks, and then king e1, and then what? Like b5, I guess. B5 is probably the best. I think, yeah, the pawn is what's super dangerous here. B5, um, I think B5 is the best response for black. Yeah, and the engine agrees. Bishop takes F7, King F8, um, and then Queen A3. This is nuts. Honestly, this game, the Traxler basically breaks the engine analysis here, at least on chess.com and with the engine at this depth. Um, too much complexity. So yeah, so anyways, let's take it. I think white is winning for a majority of this, but black ends up after all that coming up with some crazy solution involving his king and it's king, bishop, and knight. Yeah, no, it is amazing that that the engine really hasn't gotten strong enough to handle that yet. There's not that many situations like that, to be honest. I mean, I'd be curious to see what the highest, I'd be curious to see what AlphaGo or AlphaZero um, evaluates, but um, anyways, crazy win for black at the end. Uh, the king getting to f3 on move 20 or so. It's usually not a good sign, but was really important in this game. So yeah. Um, uh, yeah, I think white does the best playing king f1 as opposed to bishop takes f2. Um, But still, this is just, I mean, it's just craziness. If you can come up with a position so complicated that the engine can't comfortably calculate it, you're really in some crazy theory. But this is yet another game out of the Traxler. Very cool. Thank you very much for showing it. Uh, sure. Yeah. Just to be clear, Nick, you're Piano Man, right? From uh, Discord. Yeah, I was thinking Nick is furious. We can do uh, we can do, yeah. Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure. Because yeah, my screen name is different too. But yeah, I was thinking I would put your game at the end of the stream when we're studying the Grunfeld. I was thinking we were gonna start the analysis of the Grunfeld a little after 11 Eastern, and then I can show your game as part of that analysis. Um, but yeah, thanks very much for playing the game, and I'll put that at the end of the analysis, and I hope you can make it. But if not, we can make it part of, or you can watch a video on demand. Oh, I'm never offended or anything if it's better for you to do video on demand. Definitely, please do. Like, my goal, I'm really hoping that, I'm really hoping to be able to make chess lessons free. And I ideally I'd have all the material. I would have more than 14 days of lessons on Twitch. But we have at least 14 days of lessons on Twitch, so I'm never offended if you go back and watch on VOD. Like, definitely do. I'll go over games and analysis either way. So yeah. This I was thinking that Grunfeld. Sure, yeah, no, I think I can quickly send you a message on Discord if that's helpful, Nick. But it's going to be at the end of the stream. Our game, I was thinking, is probably going to be around 11:20, 11:25, and go until the end of the stream is what I was thinking. But thanks for the game, though. Yeah, no, super helpful, and thanks very much for contributing games to the stream. Um, cool. Awesome. The next game is from Big Green. Hey, thank you very much for the observe key. Thank you. Uh, the next game is from Big Green. Big Green is playing here as black. And let's take a look. It's a bishop opening. This has the opportunity to transpose into the Grunfeld with d5. In terms of opening theory, castles, e4, d6. Now it's an Indian. They say Indian game, but I guess I would say like King's Indian defense, basically. I like. I actually really like how chess.com labels the games. It helps me learn the names of the openings. Even some super obscure ones are in there. It's just cool. D6, castles, and here basically black plays an out of book move. Um, so let's just look in terms of opening theory here. I think this is relatively straightforward. Lots of games: bishop f4, knight c3, bishop g7, queen d2. Queen d2 is a little unusual, more straightforward developing move. Knight f3 or e4. Basically e4 being your idea of getting the bishop to c4 or something. But King's Indian defense. But what's interesting about this particular King's Indian defense is that white is castled queenside. So the standard King's Indian defense idea of putting pressure on the king side with like knight to g4, and then basically pushing forward as black here. That pushing forward on the king side with an attack as black is not going to be the main concept of this opening here, which is interesting. Here, black will basically try to start. In theory, black will start to try moving pieces towards the queen side. Things like b5, a5, a4, b4. Um, Interesting. Good question, random. Let's take a look. Um, the answer to that is yes. I mean, c5 will transpose it into some sort of Sicilian. I mean, it'll either do one of two things. It'll turn it into a Sicilian, or it'll turn it into something like completely unrecognizable as any specific opening. But let's take a look. So here, castle's queenside, c5. Um, okay. It's pretty interesting. I guess I would say, yeah, it's sort of like a Sicilian dragon, right? So it's got the bishop on g7. The only thing is that so basically on pawn takes c5, the pawn definitely can't take back, right? So black is sort of sacrificing some pawns here, I think. I mean, the d6 pawn looked like it's gonna fall. So knight c6, e takes d6, pawn takes d6, and then like bishop d6. So it gets a lot of compensation in this opening. So it's 7 pawns to 5, rook e8, and then like maybe queen a5. But black has sacrificed a lot. I mean, he's basically sacrificed control of his control of the center and his e and d pawns. Um, so it does transpose into some sort of Sicilian, but ultimately I think it's not an extremely playable move. Like this, yeah, basically this is gonna lose too much material, I think. Um, uh, Ideas are like queen a5. I mean, it's very interesting. Um, and it will provide black with an opportunity to become the attacker here again, which is good. Black's going to be attacking on the queen side quickly here. But I don't think it's quite enough for the 2 pawns that it sacrifices. But it's a really good question. There are many openings that can transpose into the closed Sicilian, or can transpose into Sicilian type games. Often out of yeah, often out of like Queen's Pawn games. Um, but yeah, e4 versus c5 in general, with d4 either d4 being played or being about to be played, can definitely transpose into a Sicilian game. Um, Interesting question. So the answer is I think c5 there isn't practical, but I think that c5 might be practical on like an upcoming move. So like d6, and then like c5 here. Now I think this is a much more kind of generally playable move. So like pawn takes c5, knight c6, and now black will have some opportunities with queen b6, knight takes e4 type ideas. So like say knight takes, pawn takes, queen b6. Um, I don't know. I mean something random. I guess I'm getting at something random here, but like castles, and then here this is a big edge for black. This is sort of the position I was looking at least. When you have knight takes e4, pushing on that knight c3 knight. But yeah, really interesting. But the main point is, we've already sort of deviated from, well, no, because I don't think you can, Justin. So if c5, pawn takes c5, this, uh, if d takes c5, yeah, in general, but you can't specifically here. Hey, good morning, Jack. How are you? So yeah, yeah, no. So I don't think you can quite do it, Justin, in this situation at least. But yeah, so yeah, not here. So I play knight c6. So anyways, this tactic is the important one. Um, anyways, queenside castling f3, bishop d7, g4. Um, this is tricky. It's really interesting because it's not super recognizable as a King's Indian defense game anymore, right? The fact that White has castled queenside is unusual in the King's Indian defense. Not basically if White castles kingside in the King's Indian defense, Black has sort of a playbook that he can draw from. You know he's supposed to advance an attack on the king side, but against a queen side attack, this is much more complicated. Um, so I don't know, c6, I guess. Bishop h6, b5. I think this is how Black's plan here. Uh, uh, yes. Well, I mean, it is good for king safety. Uh, uh, yeah. No, it's a really interesting question for so not for tonight, Tarash. But if you send one, I'll get it in for 10 a.m. tomorrow. We had a bunch of open slots actually for tonight's stream. But everyone was very nice in terms of submitting games for review. So actually, there's no more slots for tonight. Um, uh, if you have a material to send to Rasha, super happy to look at it. But uh, uh, there's definitely some variations. We were looking at a Nakamura game yesterday where White yeah, that's what I was saying. White castling queenside is unusual in the King's Indian defense. But yeah, please no, please send a game, Tarash, if you have any interest. We'll get to it at the 10 a.m. stream tomorrow. But everyone was very nice in terms of sending games over today, so everything sort of filled up. I was worried I wasn't gonna have be able to get any games in or I wouldn't have enough games for tonight, but now I do, which is great. Um, yeah, so this is strange. I mean, it kind of makes intuitive sense. This queenside castling. Basically, queenside castling here is I mean, it's interesting. You know, one of the main components of the King's Indian defense is Black's attack on the White King side. And if now basically that doesn't happen, White seems to have a pretty straightforward plan to start attacking on the King side here with like G4, H4, bishop e2, knight f3, rook g1, like a standard type basically an attack against the modern on the king side. And Black has the plan of breaking open the queen side. Um, and it's kind of interesting because White's plan looks faster to me. I haven't gone over it, but it seems like in terms of how long it's going to take, a5, b4 looks good for White here. Or yeah, I mean, basically, this plan looks slow, which makes White's kingside plan probably easier to execute. Let's look. F3, Queen A5, King B1, B4, Knight CE2, Knight BD7, Knight C1. Yeah, it was King's Indian defense. And or they ended up kind of calling it the Indian game, but it is King's Indian defense, and but it transposed into something which is not that after White queenside castles very early. Um, so what are the plans here? White is winning. White has the ability to launch an attack quickly here. Black is getting attacked already by this bishop on h6, but but White's going to need more resources in order to get an attack in. I'm thinking rook b6, rook a6 maybe. As a long-term strategic goal, bishop a6 first, trading off, and rook a6. But it's tricky. Black needs more pieces to attack. Um, if knight c3 without c4, I guess, yeah, I guess that's the reason why they call it Indian game as opposed to Knight King's Indian defense. King's Indian defense becoming out of c4, but I guess I'm using it sort of loosely. I'm just sort of looking at this pawn structure and seeing, you know, it's sort of perk Indian, not clearly defined. This is not a move that's I mean that sort of uh, eliminates the uh yeah, no, of course, Key. Thank you very much for sending the game. I'm glad you could glad you could watch it on video on demand. And yeah, always super happy to have you watch it video on demand, and I hope that was helpful. Thanks very much for sending that game, and please yeah, if you're interested, please keep stopping by, keep sending more games. It's I'm glad that you got something out of it, because I learn a lot from these analysis, and I'm glad it was something that added value. So yeah, thanks, Key dude. Really, thanks for sending the game, and thanks for saying something. I really appreciate you being here. So ideas here. Basically, castles. No, I think we're pretty much full until tomorrow morning, Mario. But if you send a game, we can look over it tomorrow morning for sure. Lots of slots open starting tomorrow. Uh, so bishop h6, b5, f3, queen a5, king b1, b4, knight ce2, and yeah, I mean, I guess maybe bishop a6, maybe knight d7. This attack looks more formidable for black than I thought it was going to be. Has an opening advantage. He has big advantage in the center and on the king side. But it does actually look like black's getting some successful counterplay here. Knight d7, knight f1, and black sort of advances this attack on with c5. And his attack and black's position is surprisingly not vulnerable on the king side. I thought white would be able to get in quicker, and I thought black would not be able to get in as quickly. So in terms of assessment, I'm a little bit surprised. I think black's getting better chances out of this than I thought he might. Thematic ideas are probably like rook to c8, maybe even doubling on the c file to attack the c2 pawn. Um, you know, uh, Really, high level tactic ideas like rook to c3 could potentially come into play. But it's an interesting situation. Anyways, let's keep looking. Um, d4, knight f6, bishop f4, castles queenside. So we were looking at lines with c6. So that's the main line here. There's a surprising amount of theory here. A good solid 30 games or so. Most have c6 or knight to c6. From an instructional standpoint, I think bishop to g4. Uh, you know, Bishop to g4 is an interesting idea. I guess I would say if the idea from bishop to g4 is to draw f3 and prevent the knight from playing to f3, then theoretically it does make sense. I understand that idea at least. Yeah. No. I get it. That is a good theoretical justification for it. Um, I guess, yeah. I guess I would say with that in mind, you know, uh, then that makes bishop to g4, of the good theoretical understanding that makes sense. Um, as a general policy, you don't want to play a piece to where it's immediately going to move, but since it's actually helps you, basically the value of bishop to g4 depends on whether or not f3 helps white or black, and it actually probably helps black here. So Yeah, bishop g4, even though it's not in the opening book, is a move that at least has a good kind of theoretical grounding to it. If it's not, I don't know if it's the best move, but in terms of evaluating from a theoretical perspective, you were trying to do something here, and that, I feel like that idea in general justifies the move. Um, yeah, so it does. But I think the thing takes away the most natural developing square for this knight. I mean, potentially it could go g4, knight h3. Yeah, I mean, you would have to evaluate. At the end of the day, the engine is not particular. It doesn't really think f3 is that great. But I think that the thought behind it is sort of what's the most important thing in evaluating the move. You have a good reason for it. So from a theoretical standpoint, we can say, oh, that's a good plan or that's a bad plan. But the most important thing is that it was a purposeful move with a good idea, with a good thinking behind it. Uh, so the important thing is it was an idea. It's not, uh, you know, obviously you want to play ideas that are as good as possible, but I can't. I guess I would say I'm not I like that there's an idea behind it. The really bad moves in my mind are the ones where they just look like black needed to develop, and then g4 looked like an arbitrarily good square. But in terms of having an idea, restricting this f3 knight is makes me think differently of that move at least. Ultimately, yeah, f3, g4 probably does advance on the king side, but at least the thought I get, so I don't feel I feel like that's something that makes sense. Bishop to d7 is probably the most natural square. Assessing f3 is a hard thing to do. Knight to f3 is the natural developing square, so restricting that is something that has some value. Whether or not the value of setting up g4 is more is a question. But I get the move, so I don't. I think that's that makes sense in terms of the analysis. Um, g4, king h8, h4, h5, knight takes, and black's done a reasonably good job of at least blocking this up for a little bit. Black's gonna need so things are now locked, at least for black. Black can sort of leave his king side alone for a few moves. And now, black's best chances are to quickly launch an attack on the queen side, offsetting white's chances on the black king side. Okay, bishop h6 is to be expected. Knight c6, f4, and f4 hangs the piece, which is a bit of a bummer because it is really an interesting game. Um, uh, yeah, this got very complicated, but yeah. So I guess in terms of evaluating this game, it's not a standard King's Indian defense, right? Um, uh, in terms of Indian defense, I guess comes out um, this question about wrestling. That I think is the biggest difference between this and Indian defense games. Yeah, there are slight improvements. Like bishop to g4 is probably not objectively the best, as understandable as it is. Probably knight to c6 or c6 b5. I guess I would say, probably, in terms of improving Black's play in this game, the best opportunity would probably be here with something like c6, b5, a5. King's Indian defense is an opening where Black is attacking. This still seems like an appropriate opportunity for Black to attack. Uh, you basically have symmetrical, or I guess asymmetrical attacks going on here. So white's going to be attacking on the king side, black's going to be attacking on the queen side, and whoever can attack more efficiently and force more defensive moves to be spent on their attack is going to have an advantage. Um, So with that said, I understand bishop g4, probably c6, b5 immediately is a just a better, that advancement on the king side in this particular case is probably more important than the development of the light squared bishop. Um, I understand the reasoning behind bishop to g4, but yeah, probably c6, b5, a5, b4, and really generating an attack as quickly as possible on the white queen side is the most important idea. Other ideas maybe like knight d7. I'm sort of curious about like knight d7, knight b6. But that's all sort of done on the idea that this queenside attack is gonna start getting uh, dangerous. In the King's Indian defense and in these flank openings, the the main idea is to expand in the most appropriate place. You've given white this big spatial advantage in the center. The basically white's winning kind of on the king side with h6, h4, that kind of stuff, and in the center. So in terms of adjusting like your vision to the most appropriate place for black to play out of a flank opening, quick expansion of the queens of the pawns on the queen side attacking the king is probably an idea that would be helpful to recognize. That's the theoretical concept behind modern perk King's Indian defense where there's a restricted position. It's looking for the places where black can comfortably expand and places where where black can comfortably expand and undermine possible overextensions by white. So here it would be c6, b5, a5. Developing the bishop to d7 is definitely not a bad idea. No, I don't have any problem with that as a general concept. Here it's just more of a question of immediacy. This white attack is gonna be somewhat dangerous. I think basically these pawns, the king on the other side of the board, so king safety is good. This will allow for white to attack very quickly and aggressively on the black king side. So launching your own attack in this position over straightforward, it's kind of a weird and not that fundamental type position. But basically, the fact that you're going to get quickly attacked makes black needing to quickly attack on the other side a more immediate concept. Um, yeah, no. I mean, the concept here, I think, which was big for White, is he improved his king safety, and he wanted to he improved his king safety, uh, and he so improving his king safety goes with diverting attacking chances from the standard King's Indian defense. Um, yeah, no, and I think you did a good job with that big green for sure. You do lock this up pretty well. But in terms of just assessment of the position, the I feel like attacking on the king side at this point, especially with like queen on d2 and bishop to f4, is like a pretty clearly signaled plan. It's this is White has played his entire game to this point to launch a king side attack. Um, so you do have good tactical defense of it. Um, but given that that that's White's plan, you either have to come up with a plan where you're trying to efficiently defend, or you have a plan where you aggressively attack on the opposing side. Both of those are ideas. And in this particular case, I think the idea launching your own attack as quickly as possible is the one that will end up providing black with the best situation. Um, I don't know how. I'm trying to think of how you could come up with a rule of thumb in terms of like why is attacking white on the queen side better than straightforward developing move like bishop d7. And I think it's just in terms of evaluating the immediacy here. You know, this position signals a quick aggressive attack for white, and because that attack is so aggressive, and at the end of the day, it's going to be I mean, you do it as effectively as possible, but it's going to be difficult to blockade. Coming up with a similarly unstoppable counterattack, I think, is a good idea for black here. Anyways, I think what ends up happening is pretty interesting. White is aggressively attacking as quickly as possible. I mean, every move is an attacking move. This is a great tactical resource, good blockade. This really worked. So yeah, so I think tactically speaking, this is a great idea. This type of h5 knight to h5 with basically the knight not being super attackable, like F knight e2, knight g3. I mean, is pretty difficult for that's a time consuming way for black to or for white to get put pressure on the h5 knight. This is a great tactical execution in terms of creating a blockade. But I think an ideal response would have gone with this good tactical execution on the blockade paired with a counterattack. Um, so like, bishop d7 doesn't really play into the counterattack as well as c6, b5 does. But overall, it's a pretty strong game. I don't think really black makes many errors, but it's an unusual thing to look at. It looks strong for white. Queenside castling in a King's Indian defense or Indian game position looks like a fairly good plan. It solves a lot of the problems. Um, of course, you got a good break here with f4, which is awesome, and end up securing a winning position. But in terms of strategic plans for this, I think tactically you did a good job. Strategic plans going forward, I think coming up with a quick counterattack here is probably black's best strategy here. But it's basically going so I think that's black's best strategy here. But this how often is this situation coming up where white is castling queenside into an Indian game type position? That's a question. But that said, castling queenside with your king castled kingside, definitely start the attack and probably best results with doing it as quickly as possible. So with that in mind, bishop g4 is probably c6 is probably better. But overall, interesting game. Shows an interesting situation that isn't that common. This queenside castling into the King's Indian defense. Hey, thank you very much, XSZ. Thank you very much for the follow. Thanks for being here. Yeah. So let's thank you very much for sending that big green. Appreciate it, and very interesting game. An unusual one out of that opening. Those are very interesting types of games. Let's take a look at the next one. Okay. So here, this was sent by the LOL player, and I will import it right now. But yeah, really interesting game. What happens in the King's Indian defense if the king doesn't castle kingside and black has basically a pre-made plan? Interesting question. I guess the end outcome is yeah, no. It does seem like a stressful opening. I mean, basically the whole theoretical concept there was attacking quickly as black as white quickly attacks. Yeah, quickly attack as black while on the queen side, while white quickly attacks you on the king side. Pretty dangerous, aggressive game. But it does show a kind of a good principle of what to do if white decides to castle queenside in King's Indian defense. I know we spent a bit of time on that game, but I actually think that one provides some interesting instructional value. Like, what happens if white plays the King's Indian defense weird? Like, I guess you just launch you quickly the same way you would quickly launch the king side attack, you quickly launch the queen side attack. That's I guess that's the answer to that question. Interesting. I haven't seen many games like that, to be honest. Okay, cool. So the LoL player sent this game as white. Gets the big center against the perk modern King's Indian defense type position. Bishop to e2, rook e8, e5, pawn takes, knight d7. Okay, cool. So this is, your standard King's Indian defense, perk, modern, closed game for black, closed flank game for black, where black's going to end up with a big, white's going to end up with a really big control of the center, but run the risk of having it, undermined due to overextension. Something like d5, knight f3, pawn takes d4, queen takes d4 is probably the best way to hold it, but I don't really see how white can hold both of these pawns in the center. It's difficult. d4 and e5 are a pawn structure that is likely to get undermined here, probably by c5. Okay. So that, to the point where that c5 undermining move is clear enough that actually the engine is recommending white play c5 proactively to prevent it, like c5 and then b4, which is a pretty wild way to prevent c5, but one that I guess intuitively sort of makes sense after a bit. Interesting. And I just want to see the opening. So we're out of opening theory. Um, This early e5 push is an interesting question. I guess I would say that probably it's not a good idea. Basically, this is a really, really open center. Good center control for white. He controls all of the fifth rank. Um, but with e5, you're really sort of pushing it on overextension. So here, there's a bunch of different games. c5 is the most popular move, very early undermining move, which we know is a key part of this position. Black plays d5 or white plays d5 and locks it up. That makes sense. Um, but neutralizing the pawns here in the center, and I know that there are some old hyper modern lines where white plays e5 against the Alekhine's game. I know those lines exist. The early e5, pawn takes e5, f takes e5. I know there are some lines like that in the Alekhines. But I think it's pretty hard to. Hey, thank you very much for the observe, Dr. Ludwig. I appreciate it. Yeah, so pawn takes e5, knight d7 maybe, knight f3. But overall, I think this is pretty. Yeah, this is pretty tricky. b6, bishop f4, bishop b7, queen d2. Okay. I mean, I get this, but I think black is always going to have a strong resource against this early e5 push with c5. And in fact, the engine is really, or the opening theory is really pushing for that. This is a kind of standard position in this big, this big type of center. It's big spatial advantage for white, but easy undermining for black, leading to an interesting game. Okay, so bishop f4, bishop b7, queen d2, knight f8, bishop h6, f6. Okay, white's in a pretty good place. Um, but I'm sort of wondering. I guess black's decision to not play c5 early enough was a problem for him here. White is playing aggressively in the center, hasn't made any tactical errors, so the center is holding and will hold. But knight f, and I guess maybe they consider knight f3. But the strength of c5 I think is really important here. The defense on this e5 pawn is going to be tricky for white. Basically the value of c5 is no, not yet, not yet, Croc. I think we've got hmm uh sorry, I just want to make sure I've got your game here. I think that might be for. I think that's for tonight, Croc. We can try to go over it if I've missed it, but uh, yeah, I just want to make sure we've got it. What's your handle on the chess.com or Lee Chess, Croc? But yeah. So, anyways, and actually, could you just send the link again? Um, I think yeah, I think that one may be off the list. So, anyways, This is really interesting. So this central expansion is tricky. Basically c5 was underestimated by both sides here. So here, c5 is so valuable to black that white is getting recommended to proactively play c5. Okay, cool. Yeah, I definitely have that one. Um, uh, yeah, I have that one for tonight, Croc. That's yeah, it's first slot tonight. Um, uh, yeah, no, no. Thank you very much for sending it, Croc. I hope that that tonight works for you in terms of your schedule. If not, it's always video on demand, so you can always see it. But it's in his number one slot for tonight. Anyways, c5. C5 proactively prevents black c5 from being played. Um, okay, cool. So on knight f3, c5, basically the engine implied that c5 was very valuable, so white should head it off. C5 basically shifts us towards equality. Here, e6 is a play for white, but c5 effectively undermines the defense on the e5 square. So much so to the point where white was recommended to play c5 on the move before. But uh, if white plays c5 here, he's got a good lead. It's really a question of how well white can keep this extended center together. It's difficult for white to keep everything together. Um, uh, but I think he might be able to do it. d4 and e5 are the pawns that need to happen. H4, h4, h5 looks like the main line attacking chance for white. Bishop takes, castles. And here, basically white is going into an end game where he's up pretty significantly. Big center and spatial advantage for white. But let's see what sort of I'm sort of curious what happened here. Um, Queen d2, knight f8, bishop takes, king takes, castles, c5, and here, white's got an edge. In the absence of undermining moves, basically in the absence of undermining moves for white center, black is basically just basically black has not that much play. His whole Black's whole game is sort of dependent on the idea that he's going to effectively undermine black center here. Hey, welcome, Caitlin. Caitlin is my friend from real life. She's Jen's friend, and our friend. But thank you for stopping by, Caitlin. So bishop f4, bishop b7, queen d2, knight f8, and here, it's basically it's basically a pretty good position for white. Black has not effectively undermined white's center, so it depends on it's basically because the center didn't collapse, the central pawns are holding for white, and white's got a big spatial advantage. Jen and Caitlin decided to join my stream today. Thank you guys. Awesome. So white has control of the center, and black doesn't really have any compensation, so it ends up being a really good advantage for white. Here, solidates with the material win of the knight, and this is a big this is a pretty easy situation for white to sort of walk in. Thanks. Yeah. So here, checkmate. Awesome. Hey, Caitlin's a subscriber thanks to you, Aphelion. So I'm happy she's here. She should make the most of that very nice gift that you were willing to give her, Aphelion. Yeah, but white basically the key part here of this game is whether or not black's able to effectively undermine the center. This is risky for white, bordering on overextension. And here, c5 is so strong that that white the engine is suggesting the sort of awkward move, awkward in the sense that it makes d4 a backwards pawn to head it off. So as a takeaway from this game, I guess I would say you did a great job. You held the center for white, and that won you the game. Um, Excellent. Exactly how a big center opening against a flank opening is supposed to win. But there was one opportunity here, which I would avoid. I would try to avoid in the future of this c5 as an undermining move against your big center. After knight f3, c5 getting played equalizes, and if you and this basically provides a new tactical idea for white, which is if c5 is going to mangle your center in a way that you will probably lose it. Sometimes c5 proactively heading things off can be a tactical resource that white can use here. And here it's good. It's a good play. c5 and white's basically in good shape. D4 pawn is awkward, but it's not so easy for black to get to it. With knight f3 on the next move, it holds well. And yeah, I think white's in good shape. Um, but interesting and not so easy, at least for me to see. Tactical resource available for white. C5 heading off black's undermining c5. Uh, you can do this, I guess, in your big center game against King's Indian Defense or Perk or Modern. Um, so potentially you could at least for me, seeing this game makes me tempted to keep that idea in my back pocket just against these types of openings. On c5, b6, b4, and white holds this big center, something which isn't super easy to do, and black is basically counting on doing in order to play this game. So overall, yeah, thank you very much for the game of the little player. An interesting instruction. Shows a new tactical resource that potentially could be used by a white player against against basically a King's Indian Defense type opening. Interesting. We have three more game. We have two more games in this stream. One of them is the game I played against Piano Man, and one of them is Kitty Cat's playing white. Kitty Cat sent this in from Reddit, and I'm excited to get to it. Cool. So let's look at this. Okay. So Kitty Cats plays the ready. Interesting. We haven't seen a ton of games out of the ready, but very playable opening. Um, uh, I've played a few games as the black side of the ready against Michael Rode in New York. He knows this opening well. C4, cool. Pawn takes C4, E4, bishop take, knight C6, bishop takes, and here I think white is in pretty white is in pretty good shape. Trading the D pawn for the C pawn for white is a trade that works pretty well. White's got a solid initiative. G6, D4, bishop G7, and then interesting. What's the advantage here? Knight c3 against is the the d4 pawn destined to fall here? I like d5 for white. This is an aggressive way to advance the center, and it blocks the white bishop. But it makes things sort of tricky in terms of advancing this. So, or makes black's position, difficult to advance. Knight e5 gets played, but then knight takes e5. I like d5. Sort of curious here. So bishop f4, I think was not. Yeah, bishop f4 was not a good enough response. You can hold this pawn. It's awkward, but basically this this yeah, this pawn can be held. So one of the various methods of holding it, I think, are a good idea. I'm sort of surprised that we managed to get so far away from opening theory, but I guess yeah, that ready. I'm surprised this ready is not something that the opening book has already. But okay. Anyways, bishop g4, e5. By the way, here I was looking at potentially after bishop to f4. But yeah, here I would just say, black can take this pawn. There's no reason why black shouldn't take this pawn here. White has pieces and pieces that are focused on the f7 square, so that's dangerous, I guess. But knight takes d4 is a completely well-supported take. Maybe potentially it ends up in being a trade for the c7 pawn. But yeah, overall, I think pretty comfortable taking the pawn on d4. So I'm not sure that black should decline that pawn. D5 I like for white. I think D5 provides an improvement. The pawn is hanging legitimately, so I think white should not really ignore that and should instead play D5, which gives an extended center, and that's tricky. Um, yeah, if you post a link, Amirko, we will get to it tomorrow during the 10 a.m. stream. Is the next time I have some open slots. Thank you very much for volunteering the game. It's always super helpful to have more material for the stream. But yeah, we'll get to it tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern if you post a link to it. Um, but yeah, so d5 I think it is an improvement for white out of this opening. Interesting opening though. Ready with early c4, trades off the pawns effectively, and then e4. I have to think e4 is not the most common move here. Yeah, so here d4 is the main move, and then it's it's basically a queen's gambit line, but a weird one. Pawn takes d6, strange. I'm almost wondering. Yeah, this is really it's unusual. But bishop takes c4. Yeah, you can post a link to the chat, Amirko, and I'll get to it tomorrow morning during the 10 a.m. stream. But yeah, super helpful. Really appreciate the idea for more material. We will get to it 100%. And if you can't make tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern, it's on video on demand for 14 days. I'll do that now. I'm super happy to have people. I understand people's schedules can be tricky, so we'll get to it and it'll be on video on demand. Bishop g7, bishop to e3 here, as opposed to f4. White's looking pretty good. So I would say maybe bishop e3 too is probably playable. But as a takeaway, I don't know if it was considered if you were thinking of it as a trade of the d4 pawn for the c7 pawn. If it is a trade for the d4, if this is an intentional trade d4 pawn for the c7 pawn, so that basically what I'm saying is knight takes, bishop takes, bishop takes, queen takes, queen takes. That's not an awesome trade for white. The d4 pawn has center control. The c7 pawn doesn't really do a whole ton. So yeah, d5 or bishop e3. I think defending this d4 pawn is better than trading for the c7 pawn if that's the concept here. So yeah, interesting. Bishop f4 is played. Now white, black declines the pawn in the center. Think it's better to take the pawn in the center, and white's back to having the initiative. Okay. Here, I think now is probably not the right time to defend the e4 pawn. I'm thinking like queen d2 and queenside castles here probably would be the plan that I would have. So bishop g4, castles queenside. Basically this will get the centralized rook on this semi-open file, relatively open file, and basically attack coming on the king side, potentially d5 or something, and then moving resources over so white can attack on the king side with a king relatively safe on the queen side. Anyways, this is pretty solid. Bishop d5 is probably the best move. I don't know, doubling and isolating those pawns on the c file. But yeah, overall, at the end of the day, white is starting to launch a more solid attack here. Bishop takes f3, or bishop h3 hangs the d4 pawn. Bishop takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, queen takes, and black is pretty, is in good shape after leaving the d4 pawn. Yeah. So I guess I'm gonna say this is an interesting game. I like the opening actually. It seemed like you got a really good transposition out of the ready here. But my advice on this game is really make sure that you keep a solid defense on the d4 pawn. This is not a pawn that you can comfortably gambit d4. This is valuable to you. So looking at this game, I would say be careful with it. Like bishop e3 is an idea. D5 is an idea. Probably d5 specifically here is the correct way to play this, and you have something that sort of looks like White's pawn structure against the Grunfeld. But yeah, in terms of corrections for White to make this game, keeping a good watch on the d4 pawn is the most important. There were just a few too many opportunities where Black really could have taken the d4 pawn. And maybe you do get some compensation, like maybe you do get this c7 pawn for Black. But d4 is a very important pawn to the position. It's really it holds your center control, and that is very important in a what ends up being sort of like an open game, almost an open game. I don't know what you would call this, because I guess it's technically a semi-open game, but don't gambit the d4 pawn. Keep a close eye on it. If you need to relieve tension on it, you can play d5 instead. So like here, d5, and this will hold relatively well. E4 is not an extremely attackable pawn. The only pawn that Black can attack it with is f5, which will ruin his kingside. So yeah, keep an eye on d4. I think is the main takeaway from this. Otherwise, a lot of interesting tactical play. But two pretty moves where d4, which is really it's probably the most important pawn in your position, is hanging. So that's my advice here on this game. Don't it's a very valuable pawn to you, and it holds. Um, hey, good day, Darkslide. Thank you for joining the stream. Um, hey, I got it, Amirko. Just come back tomorrow at 10 a.m. and I will 100% be getting to this game. It'll be the first game of the day tomorrow. I think Amirko. So thank you very much for sending it, and thanks. It's super helpful. It's super helpful for you to send that game, Amirko. Yeah, thanks for sending it over, and yeah, good stuff. Cool. Yeah, but my takeaway here is just keep an eye on the d4. No, thanks, Tarash. D4 was hanging on two separate moves here. And if White provides defense to it or moves it to d5, that's an improvement out of this game. Okay. So now I wanted to go into my last sort of section here, or the last section that I had planned. I was thinking basically there's some interesting things to do with the Grunfeld. So I had planned to take a look at the Grunfeld opening a bit here anyways. And then I was lucky enough that I played a game against Piano Man this morning that also involved the Grunfeld opening. I play the Grunfeld, so I know a good amount. I guess I would say I'm pretty comfortable like playing it and uh, know some of the basic concepts there. So yeah, so I played Billy Joel, uh, who has the username here Aelin Arts. But yeah, this was yeah, it was a very interesting game. So I guess I'm gonna open up both of the things, but I want to start with the theoretical analysis of the Grunfeld, and then move a little bit into the game that we played. So here, um, loading this game. I played this one as Black. It was another one that we sort of played with the idea in mind of was going to become a stream game. And here, I'm going to open up an analysis board, and we can take a look at Grunfeld theory. Yeah, no, it's the right username. Classic song. Uh, It's okay. So here, Grunfeld, d4, uh, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, d5. This is the main Grunfeld game. Um, very straightforward. 30,000 games in the book, and overall solid. Okay, so d5, and then white has some choices. The most common is c takes d5, knight takes d5, e4, knight takes c3, b takes c3, bishop g7, knight f3, c5, and then sort of a decision-making point for white. But this is basically well, I know you're performing tomorrow night, Caitlin. Do you have the link to? It's really nice of you to join the stream. I really appreciate it. Do you have the link to your singing, Caitlin? Um, yeah, sure. Did you send yours, Mario? If you send your game, we can go over and get one, and I can add it to the list right now. At this point, the only one I'm seeing on my list is the one from no, I don't. But yeah, go ahead, Caitlin. I don't know if any of you is interested, but Caitlin is a singer. Okay, cool. Thanks, Mario. Let me just get that right now. Um, cool. Yeah. Okay, awesome. Yeah, 100%. Thank you very much. I'm just pulling up my Reddit. Thank you, Mario. 100% for tomorrow morning. Thank you very much for sending that over. And yeah, we'll do an analysis tomorrow morning at 10. I hope that schedule works for you. And if it doesn't, you can always watch video on demand. I'll do the analysis either way. I'm super happy to get games and material for the stream. So thank you very much for sending that, Mario. It's really helpful to get games from the stream and or games for the stream, and I'm super happy to go over it. So thanks a lot for that, Mario. I've got your game. It's number 2 tomorrow morning, and I really appreciate it. Yeah, and I don't know if you guys are interested, but Caitlin is a professional singer, so she has a stream. Feel free to see her stream and watch mine on demand. We sort of messed up our schedules, so they're running at the same time. But I'd recommend. Yeah, no, of course, Mario. No, I really appreciate you sending and contributing. This works when people are interested and participating. So I really appreciate you contributing, and that goes for everybody. It's really nice of you all to send over games. It makes this much more fun. So yeah, so Caitlin's got her own stream. It runs at the same time as mine, but you guys can. I won't be offended if you go to Caitlin's and watch mine on video on demand. Twitch has a good functionality for video on demand, so or watch both, or you could. I don't know if you could do that, but it's classical music, so it doesn't have lyrics. Or no, well, no. So I guess it does have lyrics. I'm sorry about that. Yeah. Anyways, go ahead and watch hers. I'm not offended. It's all good. Okay. So yeah, so this I went through this pretty quickly, but this is the Grunfeld main line. It's the pretty well established main line, so I'm not gonna go through it too slowly. It involves basically trading the knight on c3, and then attacking as black with c5. There's a few lines here. Rook b1 happens. Bishop e3 I'm probably more familiar with. I think of bishop e3 as the main line here. Here I play knight c6, and then probably queen d2 or rook c1. Having the rook seize the open file efficiently here tends to be good. So like rook c1, c takes d4, c takes d4, castles. This is a very well-established, Grunfeld line. Grunfeld is one of those openings where it has really well-established main line. I actually have a friend who wrote a book on it, David Vigorito. Good book, actually. I read it. So I objectively say it's a good Grunfeld book. Um, but anyways, castles, bishop e2, knight c6, d5. And here, this is a different situation than Grenfell. This also happens. The move is knight e5, on knight takes, bishop takes, and then you have attacking chances on the yeah. Yeah, he's a nice guy. He's from he's from you're from New Hampshire, right, Aphelion? He's a yeah, no, Vigorito has some very good books. I definitely I think he does a good job with them. I think he's beaten me over the board like 3 or 4 times in a row, so that's a thing. But his books are well written and he does a good job with those. He also yeah, no, he's a nice guy. I know him a bit. Um, yeah. So anyways, this this is the main line Grenfell. Castles, bishop e2, and then options are either c takes d4, knight c4. Yeah, sure, I'll take a look at Felion. D5, and then options for black, either knight e5 or bishop takes c3. I think knight e5 is better, but let's see the problem with bishop takes c3. Here, bishop d2, bishop takes d2, queen takes d2, and then knight e5 is no longer an available option. No, I don't. I've heard the name. I think he's from like the Midwest or South or something. Yeah, no, I've heard the name for sure. I don't know him though. Um, yeah, I surprisingly I know I've been playing chess in the United States for like a long time, so I do know a good number of people, but he's not one that I know. Um, anyways, knight c3, c5, rook b1, castles, bishop e2, knight c6, d5. A very mainline Grunfeld. Knight e5 is the move. Knight takes, bishop takes e5. Now this is sort of interesting. White's got this very extended center. There are some advantages to yeah, New Hampshire. That's all right. I'll keep that one in mind as a New Hampshire inside joke, Athelion. Now I'll know that one. Um, if I run into someone from New Hampshire, I'll run that one by them. But yeah, so bishop e5 and queen d2, e6, f4, bishop c7. Overall here, this looks, it looks like White's got pretty good center control. One of the advantages of Black is supposed to be that he has better piece play in the in the Grunfeld. But I don't know. Here it's a little bit tricky. Oh, okay, gotcha. Um, Bishop takes c4, bishop b6, king h1, bishop f5. Okay, so now he's got pretty well established bishops here. The d5 pawn looks a little bit loose, could be target for attack. The c3 pawn looks like a potential target for attack, and overall getting to be a very open position out of the Grunfeld. I don't know. Queen f6 looks tempting. Um, and yeah, sure. Go ahead, Tarash. I was gonna move from so this isn't actually a game. I was just looking at kind of mainline Grunfeld theory, and then I was gonna move into to our game as instructive. But I think in terms of people who are sort of new to the Grunfeld, this is what the Grunfeld is: Bishop G7, Knight F3, C5. That is the mainline Grunfeld. There's anti-Grunfeld lines. So here, F3 is a move for White. Bishop G7, E4, D6, and sort of transposes into King's Indian defense, which is kind of interesting. Here, like Knight C3, castles, Bishop E3, E5, and Black gets some reasonably good position. I mean, it's a King's Indian. It's a very playable King's Indian game. Okay, I was just gonna look at a few other anti-Grunfeld lines. Grunfeld as a general formation is also playable out of C4. C4, Knight C6, Knight C3, G6, G3. And here, D5 is a playable move. This is I don't know if you would call this the Grunfeld, but it is similar with that D5 and pawn trades there. Bishop G2, knight b6, d3, bishop g7, bishop e3, knight c6. And here, basically, black, is running into very strong bishops for white, but doesn't have any developmental problems. Has basically his own fianchettoed bishop, and with bishop development, probably to bishop e6. It's a game. It's a game. It's one where black will have some good chances. Bishop e6, knight d5, bishop d5. It's uh yeah, it's interesting. The rook will move to c1. Frequently, rook to c1. Let's see. Um, Good question. I guess I would say, really good question, Tarash. In my experience is, it's not, um, yes, I would say that rest days, can be a good idea, but not for the reason that you've overexerted yourself. Rest days are important because it keeps it fun. That's when you've overtrained in chess, is when it stops being fun for you. If it continues to be fun, definitely, if it continues to be fun, that's not then you haven't overtrained. I don't think you physically have any problems. I think actually increasing your focusing stamina can be good. So, like, if it's fun for you, by all means, like, do puzzle battle for 8 hours a day for a month. Like, if that's fun. I actually think, the best way that you can strengthen your brain is to go to the point where you're fatigued or tired and then keep going, because you will increase your stamina and your ability to continue to focus for longer and longer periods of time. That's my take on it, with a very basically a non-scientific perspective. Uh, yeah, so I would just say keep pushing yourself, but not to the point where it's not fun. Many chess players have left because the game has stopped being fun for them. Um, if you push as hard as you can every time, that you run the risk of that. Or if you take things, if you take losses too personally, that can also happen. But the people who make master. I mean, I don't know grandmaster, but the people who make master are people who, uh, in general, are people who legitimately enjoy it. So yeah, I think that's perfect, Tarash. But yeah, you can push yourself really hard if you want to try to increase your focus. One of the things that you can do is do chess tactics for like 4 hours a day for an extended period. By the end, you will be mentally fatigued, and then you keep going from there, and then you will increase your stamina further and further. Just as something that uh, some rest is good. But I actually am of the idea that, as as long as you're happy, push your brain as hard as it can go for as long as it can go. I may be there may be people who disagree with that, but I actually believe that if you want to increase the strength of your brain, keep pushing. Or I don't know if one can really, but if you want to make the most of what you might be able to do, I think you get to the point where you're tired and mentally fatigued, and then keep pushing. That's but I don't know. That might be a more uh, aggressive approach than some people. Resting is good too. Feels good to rest. But it's all up to you guys. The main point is that it's fun, and that you like doing it. But that's what I've used as my own personal thing. The having chess be fun is the most important thing. If it's not fun, you're overtraining. Anyways, cool. Um, and the same thing I think goes for coding or that kind of thing. If I view feeling, I don't know, I view feeling being mentally tired as a time that you should continue, not as a time that you should stop. But that's you know that's just my opinion. Um, anyways, uh, this this is an interesting opening. I feel like I feel like we've showed some of the main lines of the Grunfeld. I was thinking let's take a look at the game that I just played against Piano Man Billy Joel here. Thank you very much for playing this game, Piano. You said notify you on when you were when our game was up, and I will do that. Cool. Uh, awesome. And here it is. So, um, yeah, that too. You know, you definitely don't want to be losing any material. Oh, and you're here, Nick. I should have seen you. I keep confusing your Twitch and chess names. But okay, so here's the Grunfeld that I play. C4, G6, Knight C3, D5. Okay, mainline Grunfeld, right? E3. E3 is a sideline, which is very playable and strong, and totally not bad for white. But it doesn't challenge black the same way that pawn takes pawn, knight takes pawn, E4 does. Here, ideas are either playing C6, changing it into standard queen's pawn Slav. Um, E3, bishop G7, C takes B5, knight takes B5, D5, knight takes, queen takes. Okay. Interesting situation. Um, Basically, the queen is probably misplaced there. C6 will no, I don't think it was a bad game. I think it was a good game. I mean, here, E3 is an interesting idea. So what was actually played was Queen C2, but the main line here is Knight takes D5. But Queen C2 is also Queen C2 is an interesting idea. So let's take a look at this. Um, okay, so I think a good way to do an analysis of Queen C2 is to look at Queen B3, which is played more frequently, and see what the similarities are. Queen b3 puts pressure directly on d5. Black needs to come up with a way of responding to this. Either knight takes c3 works or knight b6 works. On knight b6, what are the strengths of white's position? Um, well, I think that this pawn structure is pretty solid. It's not super easy to undermine. Black may try to attack it with like e5 potentially, or yeah, so e5 could be good, but white will always have the resource d5 as a response to e5 or even c5 pushes, if that's what's played. So let's look like, knight f3. Knight f3 prevents e5 entirely. If he plays like bishop to d3, which is a little bit offbeat, I guess. But on bishop to d3, black plays e5. Okay, and then I think d5 is the response here. Um, yeah, no. So I think queen b3. Yeah, no, of course, no. Thank you very much for playing the game, Piano Man. No, I appreciate it, and definitely, yeah, definitely, this is interesting. But thanks for the game, and thanks for contributing material to the stream for sure. Um, okay. Yeah. The E5 Grenfeld can be dangerous. I think one of the reasons why the E7 pawn stays in the Grenfeld is because sometimes in the Grenfeld, white gets very advanced attacking structures. So, like, E6, E5 will be going up against D4 and D5 here. That type of situation, can be pretty dangerous. Uh, yeah. So I think you're right. I think bishop to c4 is probably better. Uh, yeah. This is a move that deviates. So just going through the main line here, just so we know, is queen takes d5, knight e2, castles, knight c3, queen d8, bishop e2, and then like c6. And this looks like the Scandinavian to me. So if you're interested in, looking at, if you know the Scandinavian, you might be tempted to play into a line like this. Here moves like bishop f5, or maybe bishop e6, knight d7, f6 or f5, bishop f2, e5, or something like that, making some advanced, making basically some pawn advances in the center. But it's sort of lost a bit of its Grunfeld like flavor here. This is sort of getting more and more like the it's more like the Scandinavian than the Grunfeld at this point. Uh, okay, so that was the main line. Queen d8, sorry, so the main line was not queen c2. It was pawn takes, knight takes, knight takes, queen takes, and then knight e2. So we know that. Um, yeah. So I think one of the main lines against the Grunfeld. I think one of the main lines against the Grunfeld is probably uh, this basically this early challenge of the knight. I think challenging the knight is a good idea, in general. I think basically, you know, it will lead to open positions, but the mainline Grunfeld challenges the knight pretty seriously. This trade, if you're comfortable playing as white, offers white some pretty solid chances. You have moves like bishop to c4, bishop to e3, knight f3, rook c1, and this is pretty healthy playable game for on the white side. This opening that we played is more conservative for white. Yeah, no, right, and white gets a big pawn center in the challenging moves to the Grunfeld. So yeah, so queen c2, and then I play castles. I'm just sort of gonna move things like straightforwardly, attack, basically develop and come up with ideas, that have to do with kind of standard healthy development. This is relatively conservative for white, uh, relative to a lot of Grunfeld positions. The engine suggests knight to b4. I understand knight to b4. I mean, basically forking these, right? And yeah, yeah, I think that's right. I think that the big center is helpful to white, and also just having standard plans with like bishop to c4, rook to c1, bishop e3, knight f3. The developing moves for white against the Grunfeld in the mainline Grunfeld, like with open position. I think that's probably right. The pieces all sort of have obvious squares for development, so that I think is helpful in leading that forward. So yeah, so knight to b4. Anyways, bishop to d3 allows for knight to b4 if black wants to play it. I didn't play it. Maybe it's objectively better, but I sort of wanted to keep pieces. I wanted to sort of continue my sort of standard looking development. Knight b4 is still getting suggested, and I missed it 2 moves in a row. Bishop to e2, knight d7, castles, bishop takes, knight d7, and white's got a pretty good yeah yep. Grunfeld Grunfeld is a way of trying to change up a standard d4 opening. Uh, it's got some unusual characteristics to it. But here, Piano Man's got a pretty good position. E4 I sort of like. Um, E4, knight takes C3, C5 maybe. But overall, this yeah, no. But I mean, you've gotten a good opening position. No, I mean, it's objectively true that you have a good opening position here. I think most of this good opening position, I think an improvement on this good opening position would have been an earlier knight b4 for black. But I didn't, I didn't play that. I think in retrospect that probably was a better choice. But anyways, white gets an excellent position. Yeah, sure. If you got one, SC, we can take a look, and we can do a stream of it tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. if you send a link to it. But yeah, please send a game, and we'll watch it on the stream, SC. Um, yeah. So here, this all looks pretty good. You know, basically white has played a conservative Grunfeld. Black hasn't really capitalized it on anyway. I mean, he should have probably you know, traded here. But I think here, um, you know, black starts to get some play. Okay. So king g7, knight d2, and here I think there's going to start to be some tactical possibilities here. So knight to c3 forks the pawn and the rook. And here, knight takes a2 I don't think is playable. I think rook c2 refutes it, right? Okay, cool. Thanks SXZ. We'll add it for tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. So same time tomorrow, and we'll take a look at it. Yeah, thank you very much for sending it for sure. Yeah, it's gonna be on the stream, 100%. Where is the silly hat? I haven't picked out the silly hat yet, so we will consider that, Tarash. That's funny. But yeah, I'll start working on the execution of that idea. Okay. So rook c1, knight b5, and a4 loses the rook. It's kind of a bummer. I think white had a really good position here, and there was a lot of play left. But in like most blitz games, you know, time pressure becomes a problem. So here I think rook to d3 is probably fine. It's a little limiting to the mobility of the rook, but yeah, the rook's getting threatened, and that is a bummer, actually. White had a good position pretty much the whole way through. You know, I really didn't, you know, since this is my game, it's hard, it's a little tricky to be objective, but I don't really feel like I played like I think White got a much better position out of this opening, which is good. It teaches me something. So my no, thank you very much for playing the game, and yeah, very happy to play another game. You know, if we want to have more games for the stream, I'm happy to rematch or but thank you for reaching out on that. Yeah, so here, giving instruction to myself. I think the engine suggests, and I sort of agree. Knight b4 was a missed opportunity for black here. White gets a good position out of the opening. Right, center pawn, right? But I think this too. You know, I had the opportunity to fork the queen and bishop, and here, I have to think that was better for that was a better idea for black, right? Um, you know, knight b4, and then you know, queen needs to defend the rook or the bishop somewhere. But this is a better option. It's not the choice that I made. You know, I wasn't thinking about that as an idea. But I think that is a little bit better. That is better for black than what I played. Otherwise, so that was an opportunity. Um, otherwise, white has. I mean, white's basically outplaying black in the center. Uh, Yeah, no, it is. I mean, no, there's some undermining moves there, Tarash. But yes, you know, you definitely give white that big center. You try to undermine the center immediately with c5 in the main line. But yes, that you definitely do gift white some things. You know, but to be fair though, you do gift white some things in many openings. I mean, you know, modern perk, you give white that big center and spatial advantage. Um, so you know it depends on what you're comfortable playing with, I guess. But Grenfell is playable at a pretty high level. But it does have some shortcomings. Exactly. Yeah. No. Exactly. Um, but yeah, here you know white has played conservatively and black hasn't really done anything to disrupt it. So I think basically black's in pretty good or white's in pretty good shape. I'm not sure if this queen trade here was the best. I don't think this queen, you know, this probably wasn't necessarily the best idea. But, here, king g7, knight d2. Yeah, really up until this tactical error, white was winning. Yeah. Basically was all that tactical error. Otherwise, white's sort of outplayed black in this opening. Black didn't come up with a good solution for the queen c2 novelty. And at the end of the day, yeah, very interesting, but played out well for basically played out well for white out of the opening, and then a tactical error was made. Yeah, white played well. White played a good opening. White outplayed black in this opening. This take knight b4 is the way to play this opening as opposed to just going for development. Or if knight b4 is available, then that's what black should do. But yeah, no real objections to any of this. It's a bummer the game ended, in the time pressure, but yeah, Nick played a solid opening, and gives me some ideas for ways that I can improve. But in terms of opening theory here, you definitely justified Queen C2. Um, Queen C2 as an opening is not the main line. Queen C2 is a novelty. But Queen C2 takes, basically there's a bunch of moves in this opening book out of this. But E3 combined with Queen C2 is not in the opening book. And yet white got a good position out of the opening, so um, cool. But here, move like knight takes d5, queen takes d5, knight e2, castles is yeah. No. Thanks for sending the game, or thanks for being willing to take a look at this game on the string, Nick. And yeah, no, I appreciate it. Bishop e2, c5, d5, e6, c4. Black is black's in pretty good shape. Or sorry, white's in pretty good shape here. Tarash selling people on the Tarash defense. Yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, good opening play. I think the next step forward for you, Nick, is probably tactics, like most people. But yeah. Um, I go with some tactics training, Nick. If you have access to chess tempo or puzzle battle, or puzzle rush, I think that can help you solidify this type of game where you have an opening advantage into a yeah, no, I agree. I think that's where I would spend time if I were you. I think that's probably the most the best, the most efficient use of your time would be spending doing puzzle battle, because the opening that you got was solid here, and really what happened was a tactical error in time pressure. Isn't that the Traxler Aphelion? I'm pretty sure your opening is the Traxler. Uh, yeah, no. I think that's basically right. Uh, yeah, chess.com has some good tactical resources. I'm making the Traxler Aphelions. Well, the Traxler's not that well explored. If you come up with a novel line, I'll call it the Trax, or I'll call it the Aphelion opening. If you find an established line to the Traxler, I will call it the Aphelion opening. You'd have to see if you could find other ways to get into that opening, but or you have to find other people who refute it. Yeah, yeah, why not? Uh, Sounds good to me. Um, yeah, we can just go through the Traxler really quick. The Traxler, so we know. Uh, and thank you very much for the game, Piano Man. I think you played a good opening. Queen C2 is unorthodox, but not a but seemed to be justified. E4, E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, Bishop C4, Knight F6, Knight B5, and then what makes it the Traxler? Yeah, no. Of course, thank you, Nick. I appreciate you letting us take a look at that game. So on Knight G5, the opening, what makes it the Traxler is Bishop to C5. Um, that's the Traxler. It's showed up a number of times on this stream. Interesting, and yeah, no, cool. So Bishop to C5, and then you basically have these attacking threats on F2. That's the Traxler for you, Mario. On this idea, I think we should, and then knight takes f7, bishop takes f7, and then king either takes or king f1, which is it's not so not as good. It's, king f1 is better. Um, but yeah, old classic stuff, which is cool, interesting to look at. Anyways, I think I'm going to wrap up the stream. But thank you all very much for sending games in. We have a full set of 6 games tonight, starting with Crocs. And if anyone wants to send more games in, we have plenty of open spaces tomorrow. Yeah, really, thank you all very much for being here, and thank you all very much for sending games and hanging by the stream. Awesome. All right, guys, have a good day. I'll be back at 6:05 p.m. Eastern, and yeah, have a good day. Thanks. Bye.